He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Te Kaha seems an unlikely scene for a revolution. A little settlement just down from the East Cape where the fin of the fish pushes into the expansive ocean. Te moana a toi te huatahi. These are the lands of Te Whānau Apanui, where you're just as likely to see a horse on the highway as a ute. It's quintessential small town Aotearoa. A smattering of houses, a church, a school and a pub. And at the heart of it all, Te Kaha nui a Tiki Marae. It was here, over a long winter's weekend in 1973, that Māori artists and writers decided to have a get-together. It was a social gathering as much as anything, but one that would grow to become quite important. They'd form a community of makers who would move from marae to marae, drawing in some of the most luminous artists, with the sharpest of minds and the heartiest of wills, who would change the nation's artistic landscape.
The Kaha was a wonderful, glorious birth, experienced by us all, and we came out of it with a fervour and an enthusiasm to go forward.
This was the 1970s, an era that saw the culmination of some seismic change in Aotearoa. A nation convulsed with questions of identity, preservation, restoration and rights.
But when you really get deeply into it and you understand the injustices which have been done, they haven't honoured the whole bloody thing right from the beginning.
They are moments and movements that triggered a chain reaction still felt today. And the Māori art scene is no different.
I do get concerned about things, and I guess they're inherent in the work I do then. I'm a woman who paints, and sometimes my messages might be political.
Kia ora, I'm Matariki Williams, a curator, historian and lover of all things Ngā Toi Māori. I'm fascinated by the intersection of history and politics in Māori arts. My career has been spent in museums and galleries in research and writing. Where did this interest spring from? The small places. My nanny's and koro's kitchen tables, the back of the wharekai cracking up with my whānau, and listening intently to the words from our kaumātua. With producer Jamie Tahana, we'll spend the next 6 episodes looking at artists who, driven by a love of whenua, whakapapa and whānau, were part of this shift. From a time when Toi Māori hit the global stage to international adoration.
There are people crying at the beauty which they see, the fact that our people have so much to give to them.
While the country was seized by protest at home.
The sound of police batons raining down on shields and crash helmets of protesters.
A renaissance of culture and language was also blooming.
We are just bringing back something to our own families, to our own children, to revive our language.
But it was also a time when drastic reforms were restitching the fabric of society.
Who were made to lose their jobs in this restructuring? There's no doubt about it was the Māori and Pacific Islanders.
And responding to this all were some of the country's greatest artists, thinkers and writers.
The cracks on my Māori feet are beginning to widen. My blood turned on. Do not laugh. Laugh only when the blisters fade with the jaded politicians and their cunning.
Because if art and politics are intertwined, then what did the past 50 years look like through the eyes of some of these creators? How have they told our stories? How have these stories been understood? And how have attitudes changed?
At the moment, indigeneity is hot shit, really. But I guess what we know is that we will always make wherever the spotlight is on at whatever time.
No mai ki Pūtātara, Revolutions in Māori Art. A series where we look at some of the moments, movements, people and events which have shaped art in Aotearoa. Episode 1, the people gather. It's June 1973. Colour television has just been introduced. Fred Dagg and his gumboots are weeks away from their debut. A 12-year-old named Temuera Morrison has just starred in a film called Rangi's Catch. The reviews in the paper are glowing. This kid might have something of a future, they said. John Hanlon's Damn the Dam was Song of the Year, Shona Lang the Best New Artist. The population has just passed 3 million, and the government of Prime Minister Norman Kirk just declared a holiday.
This day will become New Zealand's day and will be recognised as such, and next year, on the 6th of February, legislation will be in existence that marks this day as New Zealand's day, New Zealand's National Day, and it will be a holiday in commemoration of that act.
Waitangi Day? No. It was called New Zealand Day, the Kirk government's attempt to appease Pākehā calls for a national day. Around this time, Māori society was on something of a precipice, and the coming years would see frustration boil over in historic ways. In the late 60s, the Crown had proposed a suite of laws around what it dubbed unproductive Māori land, essentially allowing for mass seizure. The bill would prove to be something of a catalyst.
We want all the statutes, all the laws that are pertaining to take our land, little by little at a time, to be wiped right off and let us retain the 2 million, only 2 million that is left out of 66 million.
Do you really think the Pākehā is going to listen?
Good gracious, is our land.
Outraged kaumātua like Whina Kupahe called it the Great Confiscation. Rangatahi were apoplectic. As the historian Aroha Harris wrote in Tangata Whenua, A History, by the time the 60s became the 70s, frustration had come to a head. There was a real drive to dismantle the myths of nationhood and one-peopleism, she wrote. Polite appeal was giving way to frustration as a new generation looked to more radical means. And Māori artists and writers were intimately involved. How would they capture and respond to this moment? As much as activists, lawyers or politicians, our artists, writers and composers have long kept record of the broken promises of Te Tiriti. They are sung in waiata, etched into carvings, recited in mōtiatia that have gone alongside petitions, claims and hikoi since 1840.
Ko John Miller takawingoa, taha o taku whaia no Ngāpuhi, Ngā Hapu o Ngā Te Waka ki te tua whenua, Ngāti Rehia me te whiu. Ko Tauwhara te marae, ko Rangiawhi o te wharenui, ko Waitangi te awa, ko te ahu te maunga.
John Miller has lived a life with a camera in hand, his lens focused on some of the most iconic moments in Aotearoa. Not that everyone's always understood. In this case, veteran activist Donna Awatiri.
She used to tell me off for taking photos. She was quite irritated. She thought I was a bit of a nuisance running around sticking my camera in people's faces. Then in more recent years she says, "Oh John, I'm glad I think I made a mistake there. I'm glad that you did take those photos after all."
Did you take photos at all these periods of time because you knew that we'd need them in the future?
Not really, I just did it because I liked doing it.
I meet John at his Greyland flat, where he lives surrounded by the objects of a man with an insatiable curiosity. Books are stacked around the room. There are flags from some of the marches he's photographed. The hot Tamaki Makaurau sun pierces the bamboo growing outside the window as we sit down to kōrero. John has, excuse the pun, a photographic memory. Mention any particular moment and John can tell you who was there, the date, what went down, and the specific camera he used to capture it. The political character of his photographs is clear, but they also capture in a way few others can the joy that comes from a movement, from kotahitanga. They're images taken by a man in the thick of it, but also removed and with a certain intimacy. In 1967, he was in Auckland with a camera he'd borrowed from his Uncle Alan, a Kodak 3C 35mm. when he came across an anti-Vietnam War protest.
I cannot actually recall what motivated me to go and photograph. All I know is I went to photograph, borrowed my uncle's flash camera and went along and took these photos.
Not long after, while in Wellington, he found himself hanging out with a newly formed group.
In late 1970, this young Māori chap turns up in Wellington called Pūtātara, and he was heading south to inform us of this new Māori activist organisation that had been set up called Ngā Tamatoa. So I photographed him tapping away at the typewriter in the salient office and took some photos of him outside.
Poata Iruira was the president of this new organisation, Ngā Tamatoa, the Young Warriors.
They can show the Maori people how a raw deal that they are getting and pressure Parliament into seeing this and restore a bit of pride back into the Maori.
The main kaupapa of Ngā Tamatoa in those days was the reo language, retaining the land and criticising the justice system, how the justice system did not serve Māori. And so they were the three main issues that Ngā Tamatoa was campaigning on.
For this new generation of rangatahi, there was a keen awareness of what they were missing and how it went missing. Take language. In 1910, more than 90% of Māori children could speak te reo. By 1970, it was less than 5%. That wasn't by accident. It was Crown policy.
In those days, the whole atmosphere of the country was very monocultural. Te reo Māori was very marginalised. You had a little 5-minute stint on the radio. There was nothing much on television. You had programs like Koha and that Merita Mita was involved in. You had people, Whainata and Ernie Leonard and people trying to push the scope up, but the education system did not acknowledge Te Reo Māori. The only school that I attended that had any provision for Māori was Whakatane High School in 1966, where they did have Māori available for students to study, but they had to do it by correspondence, while all this other lot was sort of in our classes learning French or Latin.
The middle of the 20th century was defined by shifting views on many issues: the environment, women's rights, civil rights, Indigenous rights. Artists here were concerned about how their practices responded to, reflected, or even influenced these shifts. The Venn diagram of artists and activists is often a big old porofita, a circle, and they were keen to take things into their own hands. A call went out. They would hui in Te Kaha over Queen's birthday weekend. The artist and broadcaster Hardy Williams was one of dozens to respond. He recalled in the 80s that it was Hone Tūwhare who broached the idea.
Yeah, I remember Hone ringing me saying, look, we got this idea of a hui. What do you reckon? Oh, yeah, good idea. What do we do? Oh, I don't know. It's up to you fellas to work out what we're going to do. Straight away, I got one of the students booked up because Hone wanted to bring a grand piano down. But, you know, from my end, that's sort of how it started.
Hone Tūwhare, one of New Zealand's most famed poets.
O voiceless land, let me echo your desolation. The mana of my house has fled. The marae is but a paddock of thistle. I come to you with a bitterness that only your dull foals can soothe. For I know, my melancholy chants shall be lost to the wind shriek about the rotting eaves.
Here he is reading an excerpt of his poem, Not by Wind Ravaged. It was published in the 1964 book, No Ordinary Sun, a collection that's never been out of print. He wrote in English, but in a style that was undeniably Māori.
Not by Wind Ravaged is about the marae and this meeting house falling to bits and the tragedy of people going away from the marae, leaving their birthplace.
Did you have any particular marae in mind?
Yes, mine.
Do you feel very deeply this passing of tradition? Your generation?
It's an attitude that I can identify myself with, but it's also a dead-end attitude. I think there are so many other big things happening in the world that we could merge ourselves into and take an interest in. Otherwise, we'll just get a little pessimistic about our own condition. It's better to face the challenge of a new world and what is happening and helping to shape it. I think that's a more positive sort of attitude than say, well, gosh, things are falling to bits. All right, if they're falling to bits, build them build them again if there's a genuine need to do so. Maori artists, they find it easily enough, to begin from natural things like, the landscape. He gets a spark, from traditional basis and develops from that. He doesn't turn back. He goes forward, I think. And his paintings are rhythmic, and alive. Good.
So in 1973, Hone took his own words to heart. Māori artists would grasp the challenge of a new world and shape it themselves. It's a very Māori thing to want to gather, to wānanga and create. To just share is enough. Something might come of it, but that's not necessarily the point. If you get dozens of makers together in one place, it's inevitable something will spark. John Miller had caught wind of Hone's idea for a hui, and that they'd managed to wrangle a marae in Te Kaha.
We went along to this house in Burleigh Street when Kaipa passed. A group of us had a truck, and we went into this little villa, little house, to carry out this baby grand piano of Ivan Lee records, because it was going to be taken down to the East Coast for him to play this classical music concert in Tūkaki Meeting House.
They loaded up the truck, strapped down the piano, piled in, and headed to Te Kaha Nui a Tiki Marae. They didn't have much planned beyond that, Harry Williams recalled. There must have been an appetite, though, because dozens of people responded to the call.
People came from the four winds of Aotearoa. All major creative disciplines are represented. Painters, poets, musicians, sculptors, writers, singers, actors, orators, weavers, carvers, designers, composers, and so on.
There were some promising tohu. On the morning of the pōhiri, a pod of whales appeared offshore as the people gathered. All around, groups huddled and cheered. It was chaos, it was beauty, it was kotahitanga.
The first one had a whole combination of activists and writers and poets and musicians attending it. Tame was there, Ngā Hui was there, Witi Himara, Harry Williams, Dun Mihaka, and he also, that author, I'm just trying to remember his name.
Rowley.
No. Yeah, he was there as well. Oh, Heratonga Pat Baker. He wrote a book called Behind the Tattooed Face.
It drew crowds far beyond writers and artists. Sat under the maho were kaumātua and other curious locals, listening intently from wooden benches. The MP for Eastern Māori, Brown Rewiti, was there, as were some other great minds. Iri Hapiti Murchie, Wiremu Parker, Harry Dancy and John Rangiho, to name but an overwhelmingly impressive few. Painter Bucknan brought his own bed because he had a crook back. The wharekai and the local school transformed into galleries, the walls draped with visual art. Others gathered in marquees whipped up on patches of lawn around the settlement. Roka Paura was a writer and Māori language pioneer who died in 2011.
This is excellent. I know there's a lot of young people here, from Te Kaha here and from Whānau, coming in to have a look, marvelling, perhaps might get some inspiration, because some of them are pretty artistic, but haven't had the opportunity to learn from real artists.
Speaking in the 80s, she recalled what it was like for the community.
People didn't really know what to do, and yet it turned out so beautiful, and there were more of our old people living then. And they sat there and listened to something that they'd never listened to before, and that was Ivan Wiedeper playing on his grand piano. Remember, he had to bring it down by truck, dismantle it to get it into the into Tukaki meeting house.
12 strapping men trying to strip down a grand piano to get it into the Tukaki meeting house. When the evening came and established the first all-night concert, Ivan Wiedupper stepped up to the grand piano in a packed meeting house, people reclining on pillows and mattresses, the grandchildren there, the elders, and the hushed light of the meeting house. You know, this is one of the aspects, one of the features of the hui that really stands out in my mind.
The weekend was so good that writer Mihi Roberts shot to the phone box across the road to book a second hui at her home in Wairoa. Flicking through John Miller's photos from that weekend and seeing the people this kaupapa drew in, I wonder if they knew what they had going. The energy is palpable. You can see it in the arms of kai kōrero in full flight, or the expressions on the faces of writers deep in thought. Emerging artistic voices who've become legends of the Māori cultural renaissance. John Miller.
The activists just went along because they were interested in this sort of, it was a new thing to have a sort of a hui like this. Then, of course, Ralph went to the first one in 1973.
John's talking here about the painter Ralph Hōtere.
But Ralph was an activist because a lot of his artwork is protesting against the nuclear war, protesting against Aramoana smelter. Some of his artworks sort of do involve an element of protest in their messages. You know, some of the other artists likewise.
Māori art and activism, like we've said, they feed one another.
It meant a lot to me.
This is Patricia Grace.
Before that, I'd been just this lone writer. I don't think I'd had anything published when the first one was held. But my first book came out in 1975, and I was contacted by Hone Tūwhare to talk about the next one.
Patricia's written dozens of novels, short stories and children's books.
Just getting to meet, I think I had met Miti Maira in Wellington when he was working for the post office. I'd seen some of the work in Te Kaha, and Hone No Ordinary Son came out, but that's the first time I'd seen a book written by Māori. So meeting all these people was really something.
Yeah, I bet. I still feel like that when I get to go along to Te Kaha. Yes. And every time there's new faces, new voices. Oh, it's so inspiring.
Yes, well, these days there are all these writers who are Māori. Then they weren't.
Yeah, but then I do look at that, I think it's called Korimako, the Bridget Underhill project, and you think, oh, there were Māori writers writing for a long, long time, but maybe nowhere to put their writing or something, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Publishers weren't interested. And that continued even after we were writing, like Whitty and Kerry, myself, whoever else there was. I didn't have trouble finding a publisher. I was approached by a publisher, but I've heard about writers who were Māori trying to get published at the time and not being able to. There could be other reasons, I don't know, but it wasn't easy.
It's that whole strength and unity thing. I've come to meet Whaia Patricia at Hongoika Marae on the coast just north of Porirua. It bears a striking resemblance to the settlement in her debut novel, Pōtiki. By the sea which hems and stitches the scalloped edges of the land. She's taking me to the Marae Arts Hub, Kēnana ki raro.
It is really a Hongoika Marae arts place.
Oh, I love it. It's quite inspiring.
Yes, yeah.
There's art everywhere. A case with a kakahu woven by her daughter Kohai, paintings from a recent kōwhaiwhai workshop colourfully adorn the walls. Outside, a couple of people are gardening, others are ambling to a nearby building.
On Mondays, we could go over there.
Mm.
We could take some food.
Yes, yeah.
Some Māori art, we call it. Yes.
Really?
But I only come for lunch because I don't do art. And I'm not going to take my writing down there because they talk too much. So just whatever. Crochet, rabbits. Denise makes rabbits. You might like to go and see her rabbits.
That is so cool. In the 1970s, Whaia Patricia was a teacher who, in her spare time, wrote. Her collection, Waiariki, was published in 1975, the first book of short stories published by a wahine Māori. It's a collection that vividly details New Zealand at the time. There's a young girl who starts to become aware of race relations, how she's seen differently as the other. An old man who feels sadness at being unable to share his practices with his urbanised mokos. Then there's Rose, a provocative young wahine who has come home from university.
I tried not to think, tried not to let my early morning feelings leave me, tried not to know that there was something different and strange in the people's reaction to us. And yet I knew this was not something new and strange, but only that during my time away from here, my vision and understanding had expanded. I was able now to see myself and other members of my race as others see us, and this new understanding left me as abandoned and dry as an emptied pod of flax that rattles and rattles into the wind.
All these stories were so prescient. A book published at exactly the moment Māori dissatisfaction was coming to a head. There were many people like Rose, the young woman from Waiariki.
Tamora tamamate Tamatoa. Tihe Mauriora. Kahivara, kahivara. Kahivara tene pito, kahivara tera pito.
What you're listening to is a gathering on the steps of Parliament in September 1972.
Tunamate. Haere. Haere ki ngā tupuna, haere ki te aupori, haere, haere, haere.
Back then, the lawn out front was a car park, the beehive a skeleton of half-constructed steel. It was a typically cold, wet and windy Wellington day when a group of about 60 rangatahi, backed by kuia and koroua, gathered with reams of paper in hand. It was a petition. 33,000 people calling for the Māori language to be taught in school. Presenting it was a 22-year-old student and member of Ngā Tamatoa, Hana Te Hemara.
In the past, there was a policy that the Māori language was not to be taught Māori people who came.
Ngā Tamatoa, along with Victoria University's Te Reo Māori Society and the Māori Students Association, had spent 2 years rallying support for a language which had been actively suppressed.
Often you hear the quotation that we're two races but one people, and I feel that we are objecting to being phased out, that Māori language has a natural heritage in this country, and through the language the New Zealander as a whole will get his identity, especially his cultural identity.
Welcome again to your Māori program. Kia ora hui hui moe no tātou katoa.
Ngā Tamatoa had burst onto the national scene the previous year, when they picketed Waitangi Day at the treaty grounds.
In tonight's program, we take a look at the recent Waitangi Day celebrations, which was marred, according to news reports, by rain and demonstrations.
Ngā Tamatoa wore black, as if in mourning, and when dignitaries spoke, they turned their heads.
When I think of the Treaty of Waitangi, up until about 6 months ago, I just heard of it, you know. It used to be on our 10 bob notes, you know, the signing of it. And I just think, well, this is a great thing about New Zealand because this is the day when we all became one. But when you really get deeply into it and you understand the injustices which have been done, they haven't honoured the whole bloody thing right from the beginning. When you learn all these things about it, well, the more and more you hear of the treaty, the more and more you just think it's a lot of crap.
It was all captured through the lens of John Miller.
Photographed the very first Ngā Tamatoa protest against the treaty, which took the authorities completely by surprise. They had to use the sailors to shove the protesting group and supporters back off the edge of the marae where they attempted to move on to disrupt the speech.
No New Zealander, however,
You can hear it in this clip. An agitated Robert Muldoon, who was finance minister at the time, heckled by passionate interjections. After the raucous events, Governor-General Sir Arthur Porritt would say, and I quote, "I just do not believe that racism or discrimination exists in this country."
Hannah Jackson, later Hannah Tahimura, she was the only one who actually got out into the middle. And I do have a photograph which I think you can sort of make out Hannah sort of out where Muldoon he's speaking on the treaty grounds, and there's another figure nearby wearing a cloak which looks as it could be Hannah, but it was getting dark because there was no daylight saving in those times, and so the evening came on an hour earlier then. So anyway, but I think it's probably Hannah, and meanwhile the police and 2 policemen and several sailors and 1 Māori warden shoving the protesters back. The following year we returned with more supporters.
Among these concerns around treaty, language and land were anxieties around mātauranga and art. They are all linked, and they had reason to be worried. There were so few carvers and weavers now. With the language in a dire state, who was there to karanga and whai kōrero? This was on everyone's mind in Te Kaha. They were determined that they not look inward. It was as much a platform for them to prove why they were needed, why they were relevant. Not long after the hui at Te Kaha, Whenakupa and Te Rōpū o Te Matakiti set out on the famous Māori Land March.
I know that the minister is putting all sharks all around. I know that. I have sharks too. Don't worry about that. I love to hear everybody speak because ko koutou hoki o tātou matakiti. Not only a few of us. Every one of us has a matakiti. And that's a wonderful thing I te ingoatanga i tātou matakiti. Because it is. It is. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Walking alongside artists and writers. In 1977, Joe Hawke set up camp at Takaparafo Bastion Point in Auckland. They camped for 507 days, demanding that Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei land rights be honoured.
I remember the slogan that was held constantly on the march: not one more acre of Māori land to be taken.
Camping alongside artists and writers.
So I believe that this is a beginning of where Māori people can get courage, can get knowledge and determination to make their genuine grievances heard and get them spelt out to the world, and to make sure that this government never ever again humiliates our people and puts them into a position of Ngāti Whātua, of Tāmaki, to be landless. And this is the beginning, and we will struggle on and fight on to make sure that that position does never ever come again.
The government ordered the police and army in, but ultimately, Takaparafo was returned. Others were at the protests in Waitangi or alongside Tua Iwa Rickard at Whaingaroa and the Raglan Golf Course.
The treaty is regarded by many of my people as an honourable document. It has been dishonoured by governments and successive governments. You know what happened to my people? They were executed in the course of defence for this land. So the treaty came to protect them. It was after the treaty. My personal reason is that I owe it to the blood of my tupunas that were slaughtered at Rangirirri. 197 from Raglan was in prison, and I don't think this country knows its history.
It's from the Land March that Hone Tūwhare wrote some of his most beloved poems.
Papa Tuanuku, Earth Mother, we are caressing, stroking the spine of the land. We are massaging the wrecked back of the land with our sore but ever-loving feet. Squirming, she rolls over with delight. Hell, she loves it. Hell, we love her.
Hardy Williams wrote that this era of artists were part of a younger generation of Māori who were at the vanguard of a political and cultural watershed, arguably the first visible start of the contemporary Māori Renaissance, a time of urban adjustment and increasing political activism.
I didn't know that my writing was political.
Patricia Grace, whose debut novel, Pōtiki, was published in 1986.
When Pōtiki came out, it was described as a political work. I didn't think so. I just thought I was writing about people who hadn't been written about much before and writing about the things that we know about, you know. For example, here in Hongaweka we had to petition against a coal-fired power station being built here, a marina, container port, public access, all through the years. So just luckily we're all of the same mind in regard to that. We probably didn't even think of it as activism. We just thought of it, oh no, we don't want that, you know. So it's always been a struggle here. So there's always been that activism. And I didn't even think of that when I was starting out as a writer. Even with Waitangi, the short stories, and I just thought of them as about the things that I knew about. But then I was told, well, if you're writing about marginalised people and their ordinary lives, then it's a political act. That's okay. It didn't really sink in until there was criticism of Pōtiki. Not a lot. I mean, it was very well received, I have to say that. I don't think it's ever gone out of print, you know. But there were objections to Māori language being used in it and not having a glossary and it being politically correct, all that. All the Māoris were good people, all the Pākehā were bad people, which wasn't quite true. But it might seem strange, but I didn't care about the criticism. I didn't mind. I think it was good for me because I felt as though I was on a right pathway with my work, and I would just do what I could do and not worry about anything else, you know.
So how do you reconcile being seen as an activist if you don't think you're one? That writing about your reality is seen by many to be rattling the cage, but also that your work has influence in realms well beyond what you might have set out to do. Over the years, Ngā Puna Waihanga got themselves organised, drafted up a constitution and formed regional bodies. They had a journal, Koru, which published work from the members. It continued to grow, to the point where future hui had to billet hundreds of manuhiri and many marae. Patricia Grace was at all but one of them.
The weekends were very, very busy, but the important thing for me about those times was that I took all my family with me. There were buses going from different directions. I'd land up there with my kids. Sometimes Waitangi came, my husband, and they tell me how much it meant to them to see all the works of, you know, Cliff Whiting, Darcy Nicholas, full of the big names really. But not only that, it was a policy of Ngā Puna Waihanga to have the local artists from each area, their work there. So there was all the weaving, the contemporary works, anything they wanted to bring along. And it was inspiring. It was.
Throughout the 70s, the pressure from protests was starting to bear down on wider New Zealand society and the government. Māori Affairs Minister Pūtātara fought to pass a bill which would prove to be a watershed, the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975. As Aotearoa entered the 80s, the pressure would reach a point where it could no longer be ignored. The rising visibility brought on by protests was bearing fruit, and museums and galleries were by no means immune. Māori wanted Toi Māori to be looked at differently, to be seen, to be heard, for it to be known that Māori art was alive, and a big opportunity for that would come in just a few years, in New York, of all places. That's coming up in episode 2. Pūtātara Revolutions in Māori Art is presented by me, Matariki Williams, and the producer is Jamie Tahana. It's made with the support of the Creative New Zealand, New Zealand On Air and RNZ Arts and Culture Podcast Co-Fund. Strategic advisors are Yana Te Nahu-Owen and Rosabelle Tan. Thanks also to RNZ's Justin Gregory for all his help and advice, and to the RNZ studio engineer team. Archival audio comes from the RNZ collection at Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision. A particular thanks to Steve Russell. The theme music is by Te Kahurere Mō Taumata, and the graphic design is by Dexter Edwards. Thanks also to Ngārino Alice, Mal Tangaire Baldwin and Taylor Galmish. You can follow and listen to all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.